In this video, I'm going to show you how I made a smooth plaster slab. I'm also going to show you the correct math to use so you don't have any leftover plaster when you're making your own slab. Let's get into it.
So the very first thing you're going to need is a mold. I have a baking pan here. I've also seen people use the big plastic containers. Just make sure the one you get has some sloped walls so it's easier to get out and you like the size that you're working with. I like to use the pan just because it's all nice and smooth on the bottom. Sometimes the plastic containers can have these weird markings and indents on them. I have a measuring tape, some isopropyl alcohol in a spray bottle, a scale, a mixer, you can also use your hands, a mask. I have distilled water here, you can also use filtered water, pottery plaster number 1, and some buckets for mixing.
I just wanted to mention that I didn't use a release agent like Murphy's soap. The first time I did this, I put on a ton of soap and ended up with a really unsmooth surface. I probably could have wiped the soap on with a paper towel this time around, but I opted for no release agent, and you'll see I was still able to get the slab out. Also, this is 100% still usable, and I am definitely going to use it. I just want to show you guys how to make one that's smooth.
So the very first thing we're going to do is some math, and we need to do this math to figure out how much water and plaster we need for our specific mold, which I will walk you through. So I'm going to take my measuring tape and measure out my mold, which is 19 by 13 by 2 inches. So let's do some math. On the screen, you'll see the equation that will help us solve how much water and plaster we will need for our specific mold. This one is in inches and ounces. You can pause and screenshot this. I also made it in centimeters and milliliters, which you can also pause and screenshot. If you want to print these, they're available for download below in the description. So I'm going to walk you through the equation with my specific numbers, and we'll start with inches and ounces. Alright, so my numbers were 19 by 13 by 2. And that's going to get me a volume of 494 cubic inches. All right, and this next part of the equation is just a conversion. All right, that's an inch. And so we're going to take 494 and multiply it by 0.55, and that'll get us 271 ounces of water. The next part of this equation includes this number, 7 over 10. This number is the recommended amount of water to plaster ratio from the people who made the plaster. So that's what we're going to use, 7 over 10. And now we're going to solve for how much ounces of plaster we need. And we do that by taking ounces of water, and we will solve for x. Next part, 7x equals 2717, divide everything by 7, and x equals 388 ounces of plaster. All right. The third part of this equation accounts for the excess amount of water and plaster we are going to have when we combine the two. The first time I did this, I had a ton of leftover plaster that I had to just throw away. That is a lot left over, actually. This 0.5 should help account for this and save you some plaster. So I just took this number and multiplied by 0.5, and that got us 136 ounces of water. So I took this number, multiplied by 0.5, and got 194 ounces. These two numbers are the final numbers I will use to weigh out my water and plaster for my specific mold dimensions. So now I'm going to flip this over and figure out the centimeters. I didn't measure mine in centimeters, but I'm just going to convert from inches to centimeters, but it doesn't really matter since you guys are going to be using different numbers than me, but I'll still walk you through the math. This is what my numbers come out to in cubic centimeters. And easily 1 cubic centimeter equals 1 milliliter, so we can just take this number and make it our milliliters, 8,095.2 milliliters of water. The next part of this equation I'm going to explain again just in case you skipped to the centimeter math. But this number, 7 over 10, is the recommended amount of water to plaster ratio from the people who produced the plaster. So that's what we're going to use. And we're going to take this number and solve for x, which is going to be our milliliters in plaster. So now solve for x, divided by 7. So these are our two numbers. The next part of this equation is going to account for the excess amount of water and plaster we have when we combine the two. The first time I did this, I had an excess amount of plaster, which I had to throw away. So the 0.5 should help us save on some plaster. So I'm going to take this number and multiply it by 0.5, and I get 4,048 milliliters of water. Then I take this number and I multiply it by 0.5 to get me 5,782 milliliters of plaster. And these would be my final numbers of water and plaster in milliliters. For my mold, I'm using ounces just because my scale takes ounces, but if yours does milliliters or ounces, just something to think about. So now that we know how much water and plaster we need, I'm gonna measure out my water. I'm just gonna make sure we tare and make sure my scale is on ounces. So now we're gonna measure out our plaster. I have another empty bucket here, and I'm using this small bucket to put the plaster in, just because I don't want this to tip over. Put on my mask.
And now I'm gonna measure out my plaster. There's 100. Oh gosh. Now I have water and plaster. I'm going to put the plaster into the water, not the water into the plaster. Go really slow.
I'm gonna let this soak for 3 to 4 minutes, and I'm just gonna tap to release any of extra air bubbles. I'm gonna spray this with rubbing alcohol. Time to mix.
Slow and steady. Tap, tap, tap. Spray.
So I'm gonna wait about 45 minutes till this is cool and damp to the touch. Oh, it's still warm.
After 45 minutes, I checked in on it and it was still warm to the touch, which is totally normal when the plaster is setting. So I just continued checking in on it until it was cool to the touch.
So it's been about an hour now, and it's nice and damp and cold to the touch, and I'm just gonna take it out. Okay, I'm gonna take this out by just slowly pulling out the sides. Show you guys. So just pushing out. Turn it over. Same thing. You can see the cracks there. Just turning it over, pushing out. All right, cool. I think it's good. I'm gonna flip it over, and I'm gonna have it at an angle here. Oh, yes. Nice. I am very pleased with this. I'm just gonna take a metal rib. This is optional, but I'm just gonna clean up the corners by sliding it. This is looking really good. It's nice and smooth. There's no bubbles anywhere. So I'm really happy with how this turned out. So now I'm gonna keep this in a cool, dark, dry place for about a week just to let it all dry out and cure, and then it's ready to go. Boom!
At first I let this dry in my garage, but I'm in Austin, Texas, and it's super humid in my garage, so I moved it inside my house to dry for a week standing like this, and halfway through the week I flipped it over. And after a week of waiting, a smooth plaster slab you can use to wedge and use for reclaim. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it useful.